James and John, the sons of thunder, nicknamed by Jesus. I think that is so cool. Jesus gave you a nickname. He didn't do that. I don't remember. I don't recall anybody else.
He named Peter the Rock.
The Rock, but
that was
that's
his nickname. He
that's
changed
like what
his
it
name.
meant. Yeah. But I keep calling them the Thunder Brothers. So if you hear me say that, you'll know what I mean. Here are for today, the Bible verses that we're going to use, and then when it's time to read, I'll just say if somebody wants to read, if they're there and could read it out, I'd appreciate it, because I mark my Bible quickly to have those. So I would appreciate that. Oh, does anyone watch The Chosen, that series?
I actually started watching
Okay, I highly recommend it if you haven't. But season 2, episode 1, it's called Thunder. Guess who it's about? Yeah, it's really good. Do you like it?
it.
Yeah, it's really good. It's impressive. So, okay. So I was drawn to this lesson immediately. I mean, I found these two particularly interesting, and I don't know. Maybe I felt like I could relate to them. They were fiery and temperamental and quick to jump when they got angry, quick to act. And so I told Fred when we first started this lesson, I was looking through it and I said, I want to teach the Sons of Thunder. So I'm here doing it. Hopefully I won't mess it up too bad. If I do, then I want to teach again, right? I've broken it into 2 lessons. I've prepared a lot more than we're going to go over today. And hopefully the time for this will work out well. It may be a little short. But it was a good place to cut it off because the second half is a little more, there's some topics that are a little more intensive. So, let's see. Fiery, temperamental, bold, had a reactive temper, described to have extreme reactions to situations that made them angry. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the lesson, and how a couple speculations on how they got that nickname. So these are just some interesting facts that I went through and jotted down. Some of them will be in the lesson in more detail. Some of them are just interesting things to know. There's a little page in the front of your book where you can write down about each one. I found I like doing that for some reason. But so James is presumed to be older than John, and that's merely because his name is listed first. When speaking of the two, it was tradition that the oldest to youngest when you were listing siblings. So it was speculated that they came from a prosperous family. Their father, Zebedee, was a fisherman. They worked for him, and they were presumed wealthy because they actually had hired staff to work on their fishing boats. Usually that wasn't the case. It was whoever's business it was, and then kids, relatives, whatever. They actually could hire people to work for them. Before these 2 brothers started following Jesus, they were not the nicest of guys. Nicknamed Sons of Thunder by Jesus. I mentioned that already, but we'll definitely get more into that. A startling transformation took place in these 2 brothers after they started following Jesus. Remember, they were known to be really fiery and judgmental. So if someone could read the intro on page 40 of the lesson book, it goes a little bit about, just introduces their transformation, or how people may become transformed after following Jesus.
I'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe you've had this experience. You've bumped into someone who you haven't seen in years, and you were absolutely stunned at how different they are. And you're not talking about looks. Back in the day, this person was, well, there's no other way to say it, irritable and self-absorbed. But the person you're talking to now is sweet and gracious. This was likely the experience from former neighbors of James and John. Before these brothers started following Jesus around AD 27, they weren't the nicest of guys, as you will see. However, in just a few years' time, the men were radically transformed. There is much in the Bible doesn't, well, it was kind of weird.
I had to read that a couple times too.
Right. There is much the Bible doesn't tell us about the second set of fishermen siblings. Some people suspect James may have been the older of the two, since James is usually listed before John. Other people speculate that because James and John could afford to hire workers to help them in the fishing business, they must have been from the prosperous family.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry, Jennifer. Would someone read Mark 1:20 since it's right there?
Mark 1:20.
Yes,
Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him.
Thank you. Okay.
In this session, we'll leave those speculative questions for the experts. We'll look instead at what the Bible does reveal about those men. In particular, the startling transformation that took place in the brothers whom Jesus nicknamed the sons of thunder.
All right. James and John, along with Peter, thank you for reading that, were considered part of Jesus' inner circle. And I also think that's very cool. I mean, to have, because you can imagine Jesus probably wasn't alone very often. You know, there was probably people everywhere he went. So to be the people that, the very few people that he took aside and spoke with and confided in and, you know, discussed stuff with, I think it's just amazing if you really think about it. So Jesus was known, or John was known as a disciple whom Jesus loved. We'll get back into that. There's more to come with that. That'll be next week's. It is intensive. James was the first apostle martyred for his faith, and the only death recorded in the Bible of the apostles, specifically of how he died. Does anyone know how he died, James? He had it for preaching and continuing Jesus' messages after Jesus was crucified. Then he was martyred. John he lived the longest. He was the only one that wasn't murdered. They said he died of natural causes. The rest of them were all died in horrible ways, but I guess specifically in the Bible, James was descriptive. Okay, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. John also wrote 5 books of the Bible, which will be next week also. Does anyone know who those are? What those are? The 5 books in the Bible that John wrote? Joyce? No? Fred? Landon?
Landon, do you know?
Okay.
Yeah, he does. He knows.
Okay, obviously he wrote
John.
John. Obviously he wrote
3 letters.
1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. And then there's one more.
The last book.
Oh, Revelation.
Revelation. He also wrote Revelation. We'll talk actually a lot about John later. So let's break down the facts. Sons of Thunder. We got to talk about that first. Possibly referring to their zeal and boldness. Some believe it came after they were visiting or tried to visit a Samaritan village and Jesus was turned away. And James and John instantly became so angry they asked Jesus if they could call down fire from heaven to destroy them. I would love to have been able to have done that. Jesus, of course, would tell me no, like he told them. So that's it. That's Luke 9:54. Would someone like to read that? Check them off as we go.
When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked the Lord, "Do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?"
Jesus said no.
But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village.
Big. I think that is showing, or the nickname in that example is showing how well their nickname fit them. It's also believed that Jesus knew James and John quite well before he asked them to follow him. So he could have already had it, you know, a good idea of how they were. And so the sons of thunder. Love it. Okay, James, John, and Peter, Jesus' inner circle. So Jesus chose 12 men to be apostles. Do you know why there are 12? It's not a coincidence. Does anyone know why there was 12 apostles? I didn't either. I don't. Yes, the Israelites were broken into 12 tribes. They were divided, and so Jesus started with 12 men to basically form New Israel. Good job. Would someone like to? We read page 45, didn't we? That was you. Oh no, page 45. Could someone read that read the unpopular apostles section, please?
Sure. If we held an apostle popularity pageant, it's doubtful that either James or John would get many votes for the congeniality prize. When Jesus and his entourage were turned away by the residents of an unnamed Samaritan village, James and John were so furious they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Luke 9:54.
We read that one. So. I'm a little out of work, but that's okay.
Might this be the reason Jesus gave them the nickname?
I don't. Fred, you know how to pronounce that? I do not.
Borges, it means rage. I can't really pronounce it. It's a Hebrew word. It really means rage. It means more than thunder. It's really a little more, from what I understand.
On another occasion, John rushed up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us."
And that would be. I don't have it up there.
Yeah, Mark 5:37.
Isn't that Mark
37.
9:38?
Yeah, which is the next one. Well,
I skipped 9:38. Okay, so can someone read Mark 9:38 and then TJ, I'll let you can go ahead and
when
finish.
they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly.
That's all it says in that verse? Obviously, I didn't read it because I didn't even write it down. Okay, all
Oh,
right.
that was wrong one. Sorry, that was wrong.
That's okay. I'm gonna write it up here so we have it.
9:38. Who has it? Okay. Teacher said, "John, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and he told him to stop because he was not one of us."
There we go. That's the better one. TJ.
All right, now go. John was eager.
All right, John was eager to claim his and the disciples' privilege and exclusivity. James and John even asked Jesus for the places of highest honor in the kingdom. When the others disciples heard about this, they became indignant with James and John.
I also apparently skipped Mark 10:41. Did someone have that? I don't have that up here either.
10:41.
Yes.
And when the 10 heard it, they began to be much displeased with James and John. That was 41.
So, not only were they not very popular with Common, they somehow managed to be not very popular with the other apostles. Okay, so the inner circle. The inner circle is really interesting. They got to witness things that no one else did. There was 5 things that they were witness to, but there was 3 that was exclusive for James and John. One is they witnessed Jesus raise the daughter of Jairus from the dead. We got 2 verses for that. Mark 5:37. Are we on track? And we're on track now. And then Luke 8:51. So someone could be ready for that second one. Now this is Jesus, John, and James, just those three. Mark 5:37.
He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James.
I'm sorry, Peter was there for these then. I thought Peter was just for the second, or the last two I was gonna mention, but Peter was part of that, I guess, for all. And then Luke 8:51. Should have my Bible ready.
On and Mark, no, whatever, you're fine. I'm looking at reading 51.
Luke 8:51.
And when he came into the house, he suffered no man to go in, save Peter and James and John, and the father and the mother of the maiden.
No one other than James, Peter, and John. They were alone with Jesus when he was transfigured before their eyes. We'll read these three verses, and if it doesn't go into enough detail, then I'll ask Fred if he can elaborate on that, because we talked about it Friday. He was my study buddy. So Matthew 17:1 is the first one. I could get it in here and read some too.
After 6 days, Jesus
Good.
took with him Peter, James, and John, and the brothers of James, and led them up to the high mountain by themselves.
And then Mark 9:2. Oh, I got it here, finally. Okay, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed. I'm going to read another one. And his clothes became a dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Okay, and then Luke 9:28 touches on it again, but it doesn't give a whole lot of detail. But if someone wants to read that, if not, I can.
About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up on to a mountain to pray.
Fred, do you know detail why that transformation happened and what Jesus wanted you to see? I touched on it, but if you...
From what I understand, he took those three up, Peter, John, and James, and they witnessed, like we said, they witnessed the resurrection of Jairus' daughter.
Right?
Later on, we'll touch on something else, but the transformation, I think he took them up there so there would be no doubt of his, his divinity, that he was a Lord, that he was God. We're just mere mortals, and here's Elijah and Moses, and Jesus is shining light. So after that, I don't think there could have been any doubt that he was the Christ, Son of
I
God.
don't know, I think that rising of the dead, I think that had done it for me. I don't know. But, could
But we
be.
still gotta remember, what kind of Christ was it? Was he the Messiah that was gonna rain fire? Or was he the Messiah that was gonna save the world?
Okay. I'll touch more on that next week. They were also asked to pray with Jesus on the night of his arrest. Matthew 26:37. If someone has it, they can jump in. If not, I can.
He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled.
Then 38 says, he told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And then Mark 14:33. A lot of Bible verses. Like this, this wasn't even a fourth of all the one. The way I did it, I don't know, we'll touch each one, but I will reference those for everybody. type them out or something so you guys have them.
What was this one, what was it?
1433.
33, let's see here, 33. He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. That the only one that's supposed to read?
Yeah, it does, there's some of them that I extended because they give a little more information in them. Actually, we're coming up on one here in a minute, but, so the fourth thing was James, John, Peter, and Andrew were alone with Jesus, once at the beginning of Christ's ministry, and then later in Peter and Andrew's home. And Mark 1:29 references that. If someone would like to read that, I'm not doing anything up here. Thank you all.
And forthwith, when they were come out of the synagogue, they entered into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John.
Good. So, and then the last one I've listed, near the end of Christ's ministry, there was an intense discussion about things to come with James and John and I think Peter. But, and that's what we know of on the Mount of Olives. The book references just verse 13:3, but Mark 13:1 through 13 kind of reads more into it, and I think there's things before and after the birthday reference that that are important. It's not horribly long. I can read it if
What
one
is
of you
Mark
guys
13?
out.
Mark 13, 1 through what?
13.
Okay. Mark 13, destruction of the temple and signs of the end of times. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, opposite of the temple, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the signs that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen. But the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nations, and kingdoms against kingdoms. There will be earthquakes in various places, and famines. There are the beginnings of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witness to them, and the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and the father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved.
I thought that was a good place to end, but if you want to read the rest of the chapter, it goes into great detail. But so Jesus basically has taken them up there, and he has, just a few years, I guess, started, this gathering these 12 apostles, and they followed him. So in that short time, he tried to teach them and lead them and guide them and give them the faith that they could continue. Because this was very close to the crucifixion. This is right before. So he's trying to tell them, this is what's going to happen. Don't believe this. believe this, trust, what I've taught you. And so he's coaching them to be able to continue because he knows what's going to happen. I think that would just be heart-wrenching to, because they obviously loved Jesus very, very much, became very close to him. It's speculated that, let's see, James and John's mother is referred a couple times in the Bible that she could have possibly been sisters with Jesus' mother, Mary. So that would have made James and John and Jesus possibly cousins. So which could also explain why he maybe knew them so well before he called them to follow him. So well that on the cross, Jesus asked John to take care of Mary for him. So we're going to talk a lot about John next week. John's a lot. John did a lot, and he is a lot. There's a few more interesting things that I didn't list, but they're in the book, but I would like to go over them before we close. We'll probably close here in about 5-10 minutes. But James on page 43. James was the elder, and he's also known as James the Greater. And I read that because somewhere in the Bible there's a James the Lesser. And it could have been because he was older. It could have been because apparently he was a big stature, in stature of a man. Son of Zebedee, brother of John, and in a family fishing business. We talked about that. Jesus referred to him and John as the sons of thunder. Called by Jesus to be a fisher of people. Part of Jesus' inner circle, along with Peter and John. Requested, along with his brother, a seat of honor in Jesus' kingdom. There's a page 46 playing the blood relative card. I'm going to read that real quick. I don't think I wrote down all of the verses for that. But they tried to, because they were relatives, they tried to, hey, since we're related, or since we're so close, in your kingdom, can we have, the seat right next to you? And so Jesus gives them a little instruction on that in this section. It says Matthew's record of the story in Mark 10:35 through 43 notes that James and John's mother was with them when they made their special request of Jesus. Talking about next in the kingdom. By comparing the gospel records of the various women who were present at Christ's crucifixion and his empty tomb, some Bible scholars believe that the mother of Zebedee's sons, which is James and John, mentioned in Matthew 27:56, the Salome, I think I mean sister. I thought it was a name, but I think it means sister. In Mark 15:40 and 16:1, and the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in John 19:25 are all the same woman. And if that's true, then James and John weren't merely the disciples of Jesus, they were his cousins, also his cousins. So, if they were indeed cousins of Jesus, then the Zebedee family was simply trying to pull strings or play the blood relative card to get an advantage. Perhaps they expected those seats of highest honor because of their family connections. But Jesus was quick to set them and all the disciples straight that this was not how things work in the kingdom. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Mark 10:43. I would like someone to read that one if they could. Yeah, I have it if you don't. Okay, but among, do you have it?
Mark 10:43.
Yes, ma'am.
But so shall it not be among you, but whoever will be great among you shall be your minister.
And I'm going to read 44. I'm sorry, were you going on, Joyce?
And whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be the servant of all.
And then read 45 too, please.
For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many.
So you have to serve.
I think, Samantha, that going back to that cousins, they were cousins, and that that's kind of loosely based. They don't,
Yeah.
But I think that them asking Jesus still refers to they don't know what kind of Messiah he is.
Well, I think they're a little uncertain
Right.
about,
They're
what's
seeing-
going to happen.
They're seeing this kingdom as a worldly kingdom. They're going to be princes, and there's going to be princesses, and there's going to be a hierarchy. And God tells us there's one hierarchy. That's the Father. Okay, so they still don't understand. So Jesus just throws them a curveball right there. Look, if you want to be first in our kingdom, you have to be a servant. That had to mess with their mind because they would have never asked that question had they understood.
If they weren't a little nervous, a little scared about, I think, what was going to happen after he was gone. I think they were worried about being able to carry it on. What kind of reaction they were going to get from people, because I'm sure they felt quite secure with Jesus standing beside them. When people attacked him or said things, and he was kind of the grounding point. When they wanted to call fire down from heaven, and he was always kind of there to center everyone. So I think that would have been very, very uneasy to think he's going to be gone. Now what's going to happen to us? You're not going to be here. But they did continue on. They did continue, after Jesus was gone, they did continue to carry out what he had asked them to do. And they, like I said, the transformation was phenomenal. Real quick, let's look at John's. Oh wait, we didn't finish James's. We got tied up on the request. So he was the first apostle martyr for his death. The only apostle whose death is recorded in the Bible, and he was beheaded on. I wrote it down. I can't remember now. King Herod's order. He was killed by the sword. On order of Herod Agrippa. If I'd kept reading it, would have told me. His symbols are a sword, indicating the manner of his death, and 3 shells representing pilgrimage by sea. And I assume that means fishing, right? I didn't understand that one.
It's kind of mystic.
Huh?
It gets kind of mystic. And
Okay.
What happened, or what is believed to have happened there, why those seashells are a symbol of James was after his death, he was in a boat of stone, and they went to Spain. They took his body to Spain. Why, where, who, what, when, I don't know. They landed, they took him in, and you kind of don't hear anything about this. Now, none of this is in the Bible. This is just tradition, okay? This is just tradition. But there are things associated with it. So some years later, a bishop or a priest was praying, and this light was coming out of the ground. It was a priest, and he went and got the bishop, and the bishop authenticated the bones of being James. And this was in the middle of Spain. So they took him to, I can't remember the name of the town, but it's real big. It's a real big pilgrimage, and millions of people take these walks to go see this church. It's something Diego, de San Diego.
Yeah.
And it's it's not in the gospel, but there are to this day, there's the Basilica of St. James there, and there are actually every year thousands of pilgrims that go here, that come from France. So the seashells, two things. The stone boat, and when they dug the bones up, it was buried under seashells like this. So that's the most I know, but it is a factor, and it is, this pilgrimage is still done today. It's very
Huh.
good.
It's interesting, but thank you. If anyone wants to teach, please, I encourage it, because this is the last thing I wanted to do, but you learn so much. But you gotta be careful, I discovered, because, you'll read lessons, even in this book, and it'll talk about things and details, but then you find out they're not really written out in the Bible that way. These are scholars over many years speculating, putting together what they know, and then coming up with possibly an accurate, but you gotta be careful, of what you dig for and what you read.
When I talk about tradition, I'll tell you, this is
Yeah.
tradition, this is not the gospel. That is not the gospel. But on the other hand, there is some living proof of something happening with James in Spain. Kind of, he was killed in Jerusalem. He had never alive went to Spain. I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know who, but it is a true tradition.
So they put these things together, and somebody will love smarter than me. Okay, so John, let's do John real quick. We got a couple minutes. Nicknames: the disciple who Jesus loved. Actually, I think John gave himself that nickname. Jesus did love him. Don't get me wrong, but I think John refers to himself as the disciple Jesus loved. But he did. He was also known as the evangelist, son of Zebedee, brother James, family fishing business. Again, with his brother, the sons of thunder. May have known the high priest, John 18:15. Will someone read that one real quick? Do you like how everybody else doing all that? Thank you guys for reading so much. It just keeps me from spending a lot of time flipping around.
John 18:50. Peter's first denial, was that what you want, or am I at the right place? Okay. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in.
So that was John. Apparently they got in because John knew the high priest.
Well, they think it's John. They speculate it's John.
Yes.
He's not named, but the reason they speculate it's Sam is because they consider him rich, like you said earlier. They consider him being a man of means, and they thought that John, James would have known. They would have had that kind of power to know the high priest.
Also, that was around the time of the Mount Olives, and it says that James, John, and Peter were there. So if James and Peter were
Well, the
still
other
here, then
disciples-
John had to be the one to talk to.
The other disciples were there also, but they weren't, Jesus asked those three specifically to go and pray with him.
Correct.
The other ones were there.
Correct.
too.
Correct. Okay. Spiritual, part of Jesus' inner circle with Peter and James, performed healing miracles. And we're going to get, like I said, a lot more into John. But John actually performed healing miracles himself. Jesus from the cross asked John to care for his mother Mary. John 19, 26 and 27. And I have it here. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. Historically, he wrote 5 books of the New Testament. We talked about those: the Gospel of John, John 1, John 2, John 3, and Revelation. John became a leader of the Jerusalem church. He was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he received his famous revelation of Jesus Christ. And that was Revelation 1 through 9. This is a revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants the events that must soon take place. He sent an angel to present this revelation to his servant John, who faithfully reported everything he saw. This is his report of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. God blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy to the church, and he blesses all who listen to its message and obey what it says, for the time is near. It goes on, it says to go through 9, but basically that's where John got what he needed to write Revelation. Let's see. Oh, and according to tradition, he died in Ephesus of natural causes around AD 100. I looked up, he was about 88, 90 years old. His symbols are a cup, referring to Jesus' reply to John and James in Matthew 20:23. If someone has that, I do not. I touched on a whole lot more than I put up there, didn't I? There's so many in this lesson, I'm surprised.
God's time's God's time. Okay, whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
20:23, Matthew 20:23.
Okay, I want to, Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared for by my Father." And when he says drink from my cup, obviously that means you are going to suffer like me.
Correct. And then an eagle, representing inspiration, particularly of the Gospel of John. My sign I had up here that I was informed no one could read is from the back of the book. So it's kind of like our lesson motto. And it says, "How is it possible that a vengeful, judgmental son of thunder becomes an apostle of love? What is it about God's love that is so transformative? And how does it work? You accept the gospel, you follow Jesus, you experience life changes." In John's first apostle, Forms of the Word Love, read that before next week if you want, because we're going to talk about it all. Love appears more than 40 times in just 5 chapters of that book of the Bible. And some of the verses referenced in John is followers of Jesus are called to love one another. That's mentioned. It's got actually 3 different chapters up there in 1, 2, 3, 6 different verses. So it's talked about a lot. Love must involve actions, not just words. Love frees us from fear. Jesus is the ultimate expression of God's love. Disciples are not to love worldly items, and there's more, and we'll go over those next week. But for this week, that's it. Thank you. See you upstairs.
Let's get to church.